Good morning from Mumbai and good evening in San Antonio, Texas. Mike Carnell back again. We did episode 15, cadence, and with three part of it, and I tossed it around, and we got a lot of inputs on that single matrix law that you introduced me to, and then we presented that in virtually in Submit by Gerard too. So let me do my standard work of introducing you, and I'm sure I'll get this time right.
Here we go.
There we go. There we go, really. Hell does it happen? Here we go at last, and 36th episode, and Dr. M is still trying to do continuous improvement in displaying the slides. One day I'll get it right. Okay, so
software is always a challenge.
Here we are.
All right.
You're going to talk to us about sustainable change management, a competitive advantage. And let me introduce you. You're the founder, president, and CEO of CS International LP, partner of Black Swan Response, founder, president, and CEO of Six Sigma Application. You are recognized as an international thought leader, serial entrepreneur, author, and educator, consultant in the area of continuous sustainable improvement. And that's what you're going to talk about sustainability.
Right.
You began your career way back in 1980s in Motorola, and in collaboration with the Government Electronics Division, you were responsible for developing the methodology of Six Sigma or DMAC, especially the D part of DMAC, what you had told me. At Lonmin Platinum South Africa, you're awarded twice in 2006 and 2007 by WCBF. What's the full form of that, Mike?
I'm sorry?
What's the full form of WCBF?
I have no idea. That's the name of that company that puts on that. Yeah, it's their organization that puts on that.
Yeah, and there you were awarded the best achievement for Six Sigma. And again, 2009, with EMCON Technologies, were awarded the best new deployment of the year in iSixSigma live conference in Miami. Both has awarded you for recent deployment of the year 2018. I hope I get the pronunciation of Ferocia correct. I had a problem with dystopia once upon a time. Okay, there you go. And then in last year, your article on disruption and dystopia was listed by the WHO in COVID-19 global literature on coronavirus disease. That was just a year ago. And we just went through the horrible 2 years that we have. But then we are all safe now. And
that's what they tell us.
Yeah, and then hand it over to you, Mike, and let's talk to us about sustainable change management, which is going to be a competitive advantage in this era. Over to you. And I'm going to stop sharing, and all yours, Mike.
Now I've got to figure out how to share my screen, right? So here we go again. Oh, Why? There it is. All right. Just to clarify a point too on the introduction, the development of Six Sigma was done by a large group of people. I did a little bit of it. I mean, there were a lot of people that did a lot more, but it was a very collaborative effort. It was a fun effort. We had a good time doing it. Worked with a lot of people that have become well known over the years for consulting and continuous improvement. So, yeah, it was a good time. Anyhow, so what we want to talk about is we want to talk about sustainable change management. Basically, we want to do this in terms of sustainable, how you achieve sustainability. Because I mean, if you haven't got sustainability, you're really wasting people's time and wasting people's money. And this is kind of a follow-on to a previous podcast you did with Jeff Heslop, where we touched on a thing called change acceleration process, which of course Jeff was expert at, because I mean he spent tons of time at General Electric Aviation. When he and I worked together in '96, it was GE aircraft engines. We were just developing the 777 engine, the GE90 engine. So it was the engine that's on the 777. So I mean, it was fairly serious. I mean, you're developing an engine that has to last. I mean, you know, we would take that flight out of Atlanta down to Johannesburg without stopping. So I mean, you're talking about an engine that has to stay in the air for like 17 straight hours. Anyhow, so yeah, we did a lot of work. So Jeff did a lot of discussion around CAP, and that was the GE model that they use for change. But yeah, I want to talk about some other things that I think make a difference. So here we go. I worked with a company called Crane Corporation, which everybody knows from the aspect of probably, I don't know a good way to say this, but toilets, okay, and what they call pottery. But what the company actually does, at the time anyhow, I haven't had any contact with them recently, but they were the largest manufacturer of vending machines in the world at the time. And they used to have these shirts that everybody wore that said change is inevitable except from vending machines. So just a little humor on the front end. Very little, but it's a little humor. Anyhow, so when we sit down and we look at what we do for a living and all the stuff that we do, and everybody talks about this, and we've got all these little camps and everybody's gotten tribal about this. And I mean, it doesn't really gain you anything, right? Because, you know, you ask somebody and it's like, what business are you in? You say, well, I'm in Six Sigma, but, you know, I think theory of constraints is a horrible mess, you know, and some guys going, well, you know, if you aren't doing Kaizen, then you aren't doing the right thing, you know, and certainly after last year, everybody's well aware that it doesn't matter what you're doing, you better be doing something with supply chain. So you get these answers like this, and they all think they're in these businesses. And the truth of the matter is everybody's in exactly the same business. Okay. And that business is change management. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're in Six Sigma, if you're in Lean, if you're in theory of constraints or whatever, if you can't execute change, you're just another part of, you know, waste. You're another part of wasted funds, wasted time, wasted resources. So, I mean, if you go out and do a project and it's got the best statistics in the world, or it's got the greatest conclusions in the world, and you can't execute the change, then you basically just wasted everybody's money. So everybody's involved in their identity initiatives, and they don't have much to say good about anybody else. And it just makes everybody in the business look ridiculous. But like I say, regardless of what you're in, positive, sustainable change is what makes the difference. It's, sustainable change is really the only criteria that our customers, our customers as consultants or educators or whatever you choose to be seen as, sustainable change is really the only thing that they value. You can talk to them all day long about statistics. You'll put them to sleep. Okay. But this change is their desired result. And once you start playing around and, pontificating about, this and that, about, why you're better than somebody else and something else like that, you're in an area that the customers really don't care about. So there's really no sense in engaging in it. So the business of change, again, people that have, who lead the companies, you stand in front of them and you talk to them, and you can go on and on and on about value stream mapping or hypothesis testing, 5S control charts. You can have all this elaborate theory that you want. They don't care. Okay. What they live day in and day out is that when they go out and they spend money, and they spend a lot of money. Okay. Our country, the US, spends billions of dollars every year buying training classes and all different kinds of initiatives. And what management level sees is 70 to 80% of the money that they spent, the change fails. Okay. Which means they wasted money. Okay. And that came out of an article from Harvard Business Review, Cracking the Code of Change. So they are very tired of spending their money on something that buys them absolutely no value. So we come down to the first issue. You see these two terms used interchangeably. I don't know how much difference this makes, but I want to have a clear understanding, that when I talk about change, it's different than transformation. Change is actually very short-term focus. It's really focused on the present. Okay. Tends to be more in natural work teams, smaller work teams, things like that. When I do a transformation, we're talking about transforming a business. It's a wider scope. It's a longer range of time. You affect an entire business. You affect an entire business, and a lot of times you're affecting them at a cultural level. You're changing the way they do business. So through this presentation, if you want to talk later and have a discussion about what's change and transformation, that's good. But through this presentation, when I speak about change, we're talking about a very short-term, very focused effort. Okay, so this is probably one of the most irritating things in the world. No matter who you talk to, first words out of their mouth is they always go, change is hard. And it's like, oh my God, what insight. I could have made a ton of money over the years, because you go into a conference or somebody's putting on a class, and you can say, I'll bet you $5. The first thing he's going to say is change is hard, and there's almost somebody that'll always go, yeah, I'll take that bet. And first words out of their mouths is always change is hard, which I find irritating. If somebody says that, particularly if you're talking to them in terms of actually engaging them to help you with change management, and they tell you change is hard, the first thing you got to ask them is why. Okay. Why does it have to be hard? And if they know why it's hard and they can, articulate a plan that says, okay, if I do this and this, I'll make it easier, then they shouldn't have said it's hard, because now they know how to make it easier. If they don't have a clue of how to make it easier, then don't hire them. Okay. So regardless of what they say, get the answer from them and then get rid of them, because it's not somebody that you need in your organization to wander around telling everybody that what you want to accomplish is hard to do. It's not hard to do. It's, it takes dedication, it takes focus, it takes effort, but it's not particularly hard. Okay. This is a guy named John Cotter. Everybody involved in change knows who Cotter is. He came out of Harvard, and he's pretty much recognized as a guy that knows how to do change. But he's really, if you read what he does, okay, he does things that make sense, okay, that says, build a coalition and do this, and these are steps you do when you're implementing change. But what you actually, we'll get into where you actually need to focus, but he is a thought leader, okay? So this is, can't know why I won't stay on that slide. This is Cotter's model, okay? And these are steps that I think people all know, and even if they don't know from reading his books, they're kind of common sense. You need a sense of urgency, you need to build a guiding team, you need to develop a vision. When you say vision, you're talking about current state versus future state. You communicate for buy-in. You look at it, okay, everybody pretty much understands these steps at this point because they've been around for years, and Cotter is pretty well read. But this is what you on your project are going to have to face, okay, is who are we going to deal with? Okay, so when I look at it, okay, we've got this first 15% early adopters. Okay, and I changed this to match the language from one of your earlier presentations, so we didn't have two different names for these groups. Okay, but these early adopters, to me, these are dangerous people. Okay, every company has things that they do extremely well, and they have things that they don't do well. And you're being brought in, or your job, even as an employee, is to address the things that are not working well. A lot of times these early adopters don't take the time to figure out what's working and what isn't working. And the last thing you want them to do is change one of the things that's actually making you successful as an organization. So I consider them dangerous. You got to figure out who they are. You got to keep a pretty tight control of them. You've got this early majority. This is where your leverage is. I mean, you start working with these folks, and you get some successes. And people always do this thing, they want quick wins. That hasn't got anything to do with it. Okay, if you fix an easy problem, nobody cares. Okay, because everybody knows you fixed an easy problem, and they walk away going, "Oh, that was an easy problem. Anybody could have fixed it." Okay, normally we try and find one that everybody thinks is pretty much impossible to fix, and that's where we start. Because when you show up in an organization, at least as a consultant, you've got no credibility. They don't know you. They've got no reason to trust you, and change is heavily dependent on trust. So you work with these guys, you execute a significant project, and people will talk about it. Once you get the early majority, then you get the late majority. Okay, now when you get these two, now you've got 70% of the organization. And then if you add in the early adopters, hopefully by then they've learned kind of where the boundaries are on the change. So now you've got 85%. Okay, you have this other 15% over here that we call OMDB, which is short for over my dead body. Means they have no intention of changing anything. And very frequently people will say, just fire him. Okay, and there's going to be the occasional person in there that's doing it just to be stubborn and things like that. But But I mean, there's a natural proclivity to not want to change. So I mean, you have to take that into account. But you don't hold up an entire corporation over it. But there's also medical issues, and I hate to make excuses like this, but it's just something that people need to be aware of. Okay, when we got over my dead body, so it's no matter what, they're not going to support you. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons, like I said, that people don't want to change. You just have to work through that, you know, and you can, people like to say, okay, well, I want to work out in a group. What they don't seem to understand is if I'm sitting in a group of, say, 8 people, I got 8 people on a team, and I'm going to throw out my best idea, and this is the greatest idea ever, and it's going to revolutionize everything, and everybody's going to love my idea. Okay, you're sitting there suggesting change to 7 other people that are going, that's his idea. That's not my idea. Okay, so you, in that team where you feel comfortable, you've got about 7 other people that are going, I'm not doing that. Okay, so you've got to deal with that kind of stuff in here. But again, as I said, as a change leader, you have to have credibility. You know, you have to be very careful. We talked about this in our first 3 podcasts about the, you know, life in the fast lane, because you've got to be very careful about how much change you throw at people. If you start throwing a lot of change at people, you stress them out. And if you get them too stressed out, they just stop. Okay. And they'll stop. I mean, even to the point where they'll stop coming to work. You know, and I mean, if you're going through huge change initiatives and all of a sudden you start seeing your attendance rate go down, that's a pretty good indication you need to slow down. Okay. But on top of all that, there's actual medical conditions. Okay. There's this phobia, okay, about people and for changing, actually just a phobia about change, and it's any change. Doesn't have to necessarily do what you're doing at work, but okay. This one, misonism, okay, this is an actual condition. It's a people have a hatred or fear of change or innovation. So this isn't like located just on change. I mean, this is if you're in innovation, which going back to life in the fast lane, innovation is becoming more and more pervasive. I mean, we're going faster and faster and faster. So innovation is hitting us right and left, day in and day out. I mean, we're just in a conversation the other day. I mean, when we started the first Six Sigma deployment, we were using the Motorola brick phones. People may not even know what that is anymore. And the internet was just starting to be used. You know, so I mean, we're being hit with innovation. If you're in the electronics business, you're being hit with innovation all day, every day. So if you've got somebody in there that has an absolute medical condition that's hatred for fear of change, it's not that they're being obstinate. I mean, you just got to understand, you know, you have to figure out what you're going to do to deal with it. But still, you know, you don't just fire them, you know, because, you know, you think that's the only way you can deal with it. Spend a little time trying to figure it out. Anyhow, so this is probably, out of everything that we're going to put up here today, this is probably the most important concept that people need to walk away from. When you start a project, when you start a project that's going to end up in change, and it doesn't matter whether you're implementing SAP or if you're implementing Lean, okay, the day that you get that project, somebody in management says, okay, here, this is what you're going to work on. Okay, at that point, your team, you may not even know who the team is, but your team has zero ownership because they don't even know what it is, right? And you're the only one that knows what it is. So you have 100% of the ownership. So over the course of what you're going to do when you work through with them is you've got to transfer that ownership. Okay. the only way you're going to execute sustainable change is that team needs to own that change. So as you go, you work through it, and I mean, the easiest way for me to explain it is, when I'm down here doing define and measure, I'm just barely, drawing boundaries around it, but as I get through analyze, that's where you start to see the transfer happen. Okay. They're starting to understand where's the issue, what are the options, things like that, and if you just walk in and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. I mean, honest to God, I worked on this one lean deployment, most ridiculous thing I ever saw. Everybody was supposed to be in these 5-day Kaizen events, but by the time you got everything all defined and everything like that, we were supposed to pull out these 2 3-ring binders, 3-inch 3-ring binders, and those were the solutions manuals. Okay, so all the solutions available to you were in there, but you had to pick one. Okay, that's a team that will never own that solution. Okay, and so I was always in trouble because I don't think I remember ever opening those 3-ring binders, maybe then more than once or twice. But you'd work with the team, and as the team developed, the ownership and stuff like that, they take full ownership. The team leader, you don't want to stay the team leader. Okay, and that's another part of the problem. As if you're the team leader, give up your ownership, give it to the people, let the team, let them run with it. You've done your job, you've got them through this process, they've got a solution, and let them take over the implementation. So that transfer of ownership, understanding that that's your job, and this is a concept drawing. Okay, there's no data behind the way these curves particularly look at are particularly shaped. So you want that to occur, just make sure it happens. The timing could be completely different. Actually, I can almost guarantee it'll be different. Nothing happens on that smooth of a curve. But anyhow, so that's the concept that we're after. That's what we want to do. So we've got Cotter's process that everybody's aware of. We're trying to transfer ownership. So really what we're looking for how do we make this sustainable? Okay. We use what we call Galbraith star model. This is a pragmatic approach. This is not new. Okay. This was developed in the 1960s by Jay Galbraith. He's passed. My understanding is he's passed now. I heard that USC is probably got control of this intellectual property, but anyhow, so it's been around for years. This is not like some new cutting edge thing. This has been around. People just don't bother to take the time to go through these steps. Okay. But anyhow, all this came off of the Galbraith Management Limited website. So this is not my intellectual property. This is just something we use because it works. So anyhow, in the beginning, you start out with strategy. This is where, top level management really comes in. They establish the vision, the mission, the objectives. And this is basically where management should establish their vision of the future. And there was a discussion on one of the discussion forums the other day about wholesale versus retail. And what they were doing is they were using the term wholesale to describe this idea of a vision, mission, objectives. And so that is the responsibility of upper level management. And for some reason, people have got this weird idea, that the CEO has to be coming down onto the floor and has to be the person that implements all this change. That's not his job. Okay. They do this. They do the vision, mission, objectives, and it's up to us to build that bridge. Okay. But that's got to lead into the how to when we look at it. and this is again using the information from Galbraith, they see it as two different types, generic and competitive.
Mm.
Okay, so when they talk about generic, they're talking about how does the company grow or how does it do it. Globalization, how to accomplish that. Competitive is what do we compete on? Okay, price, quality. I mean, you look at Amazon, right? They're competing, with their delivery. They're competing with their price, competing with their being online. Okay, that's how they've chosen to compete. Okay, that is their competitive strategy. And if you go back again to guys like Jack Welch, he says if you don't have a competitive advantage, don't compete. You'll get beat. Okay, so you need to know what it is. Then you got the structure, the formal organization, and it's the reporting structure. Who's staffed, who's reporting to who has what power, who has what authority. Is it centralized? Is it decentralized? And you don't have to centralize the entire organization. You may centralize purchasing for purchasing power, and then centralize operations. So, I mean, it's not telling you which one's right or wrong, but it's saying you need to make that decision. You need to make it clear so people know what it is. Okay. Then you get down to the process. You have to make this fit with the organization. And you have to look at it in terms of information flow and who has what decision authority. One of the things when you talk about TPS, everybody here likes to talk about their value stream maps. TPS doesn't have a value stream map, but they have a map of information flow. Okay. And somewhere along the line, we've decided they're the same thing and they aren't. So anyhow, when you start looking at that, you've got types of processes. There's a horizontal process and a vertical process. Your vertical processes tend to be more administrative, okay, like attendance records, pay, stuff like that. Horizontal processes run between departments, and if we go back to the General Electric example, Jeff came out of GE Aircraft Engines. So when I was there, I had aircraft engines, I had power generation. But if you look at power generation, and I'll probably get in trouble with some of those power generation engineers down there, but a gas-powered generator or jet fuel generator, okay, is basically a jet engine in a cement box. And I'm sure they don't appreciate it being summarized like that, but basically that's what it is. So, if you found something in GE Aviation, you wanted that information to go horizontally over to power generation because it may not necessarily be applicable, directly applicable, or it may be, and so when you're trying to accelerate change and get leverage, you don't pay for a project for something in aircraft engines and then pay for something over in power gen. You make sure you got free flow of information between the two and everybody benefits from one project. Okay, that's how you make money. Anyhow, so the process, you got to look up, and if you read that book called Alignment, they talk about vertical alignment and horizontal alignment. You can get a lot better definition if you just take a couple hours to read that book. I mean, it's very good about defining that. Rewards are interesting. Ideally, they're supposed to supply motivation. And then you get the people that go, well, recognition is a better motivator. That's not true. It depends on what the organization is built around. Motorola, we did not see much in the way of financial rewards. Okay. But there were different things in different organizations. Something that may get a group motivated in in government electronics out in Phoenix
Mm.
wouldn't necessarily work with the group in Seguin, Texas that's doing automotive electronics. Okay, so when you set up a reward system, it has to fit with the organization. So if you've got an organization that's motivated by t-shirts, which I'll be honest with you, a lot of them are, they love getting t-shirts. Okay. And then you roll in with your new change process and you've got this financial reward that goes with any of your change, and all of a sudden everybody's focused on your change initiative. You just made an enemy out of every single person that's part of the t-shirt culture. So you got to fit, because you start making enemies and you're not going to last long. So it should be appropriate to the organization, should be appropriate to the level of the organization. You want consistency between departments and initiatives. You don't say, I'm going to implement lean, and for these guys over here, we got this kind of reward, and for these guys over here, we got this kind of reward. And it's fairly obvious, somebody over here is getting a gift certificate to McDonald's and somebody over here is getting a check for $1,000. You're going to have a problem. And again, you need to watch your metrics. Make sure you have clean measurement systems, because if nothing else, management is very good at gaming metrics. And once they start gaming it, then nobody's gonna want to play. People are the number one resource for all this. I mean, it's what change is all about. It's all about people. So, you need a human resource plan. I mean, we always set up something that says, okay, if somebody comes off and they work on a team, say for a year or two, do you guarantee their position going back? Do you guarantee their pay, stuff like that. You got to make sure people are taken care of. You also need to, as you're going to change, you need to know what kind of people are needed in the future, what types of people are needed. And when I'm talking types, I'm not talking, anything, I don't know, whatever we talk about when we talk about a diversity. I mean, we're talking about personality type. So if I know I've got to fill a specific type of marketing job in the future, I mean, it should tell me right away that I probably don't want introverts, right? I mean, for marketing, I'm probably wanting people that are extroverted, people that probably have, some kind of history in sales, things like that. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for when we say what types of people are needed. You define it in terms of skill sets. So then once you decide who you got to figure out where you're going to go find them, right? And it's always good to do this way ahead of time. But for some reason, we always seem to wait till the last minute, and we end up picking people that are less than optimal. The other thing that when we come down to people is when you do change, obviously, you got to train people, right? I mean, you can't just go out and, everybody comes into work one day and all of a sudden there's a brand new machine there and you're going, all right, there it is. Somebody needs to go out there and say, okay, let me show you how this works. Let me show you why you need to do this. So you got to train the people in the intended process now, but you also need to go back and address how you train people as new people as they come in. What kind of training did the people before get? Is it sufficient? How does it need to be changed? How do we make sure everybody that's coming in, is adequately prepared to operate in this new operation? So, and yeah, you don't want to have legacy people training, because then you just have them training people in their bad habits. So anyhow, training is a key part of the change initiative. So that's basically the STAR model. This slide right here is basically everything we just covered. Makes it a little easier. It's got it actually drawn on the STAR model. So if somebody wants to look at it, you can see it with a little bit of the definition under it. You don't have to bounce around through a bunch of slides. So anyhow, that's the the STAR model is a foundation that you build something like the Cotter model on top of,
Mm,
because this is what makes it sustainable.
mm,
And if I'm going to start a project, okay, before I even start it, back when we're in that stage where I've got 100% ownership and the team doesn't even know what the issue is,
mm,
as a team leader, it should be your responsibility to take what you're about to do
mm,
and walk yourself through these steps.
mm,
Okay. What's the structure? What's the vision? How am I fitting into that future state?
mm,
What's the process? Where do I fit in the process? What are my metrics and rewards?
mm,
What are my people? Who are my
mm,
people? Who are my practices?
mm,
Do I have them? And what's my strategy going to be?
mm,
So yeah, you need to go through all that. And, maybe just you mentally, or walk your team through it. Share everything you've got with the team. The more you make them a part of everything you're doing, the better off you are. So that's pretty much what we consider the key to sustainable change, how you layer in the STAR model and build on top of it.
mm,
So if we go back and kind of summarize what we've talked about, 70%, we started out with 70 to 80% of change initiatives fail.
mm,
Uh, it's out of Harvard Business Review. Okay, the basics to change at the project level are understood already. Okay, but go through them. Talk to people, make sure they understand. Ownership transfer is the most important concept that's coming out of this. You've got to make sure that you're aware of and making sure that ownership transfer happens. Again, after you look at that, you've got to look and make sure that your change is being built on a solid foundation, just like anything else. And the Galbraith STAR model, been around since the 60s. It's a pretty good foundation to build on.
mm,
And then when you look at it, at the end of the day,
mm,
all this should be part of what they call your QMS,
mm,
your quality management system.
mm,
At the minimum, it should be part of the QMS. It should actually be part of your management system in general.
mm,
Again, going back to Welch, if you read when he wrote Straight from the Gut,
mm,
he'll tell you that CAP system that Jeff and I were talking about
mm,
was one of the foundations he put in place before he did a lot of his other changes, because he understood how critical it was to the success of an organization to be able to execute change. So it was considered a basic skill set. And they were so good at it, it was actually a competitive advantage for them. So that's it. Thank you for your time and attention. And it's back to you.
Yeah, there are, just for my understanding, there are only two issues. If we can stop staring, we can just exchange
Sure.
the two aspects. It's come out very well. One of the things that I really liked is the ownership transfer that you showed, where the leader, the team, the leader hands over the ownership to the team as such. Now, my query there is, he's always there. There has to be an assurance for the team, although the ownership is transferred, but there is a safety net that is provided to them. If I get you right, that the leader is there for them in case there is a slip or what have you, but there's a safety net that they are permitted to fail or whatever, but the ownership is transferred, but he is there to help them out in case it's required. Am I right in assuming that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Most of the time when we do a project, we build a financial model around it. Okay. And so when you finish a project, at the very end, okay, you've got two metrics that you're looking at. you're looking at annualized benefits. We only project benefits out for 12 months. I mean, the organization can do whatever they want to do, but we do a 12-month model. Okay, so it says so over the next 12 months, this project's going to produce, just for ease of calculation, $100,000 a month. Okay, so when you look at annualized benefits, you know, I've got 1.2 million and I've got realized benefits. Okay, how much is actually realized? And it's zero. So at the end of the first month, your realized should be reading $100,000, and your annualized should now be 100. So as the annualized is coming down, the realized is going up. So if at any month, if you've actually projected, say, $100,000 a month, if you don't realize the $100,000, something's wrong. Okay, and at that point, the person that was the team leader needs to go back and kind of step in with the team and say, okay, what happened? Where'd the money go? You know, and it doesn't necessarily have to be money. It's whatever metric you choose to run on. But you need to see that movement that says, I'm measuring monthly. And if it doesn't show up, somebody's going to show up and we're going to have accountability of where that went. And once people see that there's accountability, you know, then you've got no more issues. You don't very often miss more than, you know, if somebody shows up every time, a lot of that attrition just kind of goes away. So yeah, the leader doesn't disappear. They just kind of move on to another project. But yeah, anything goes wrong, yeah, they go back. At least when we're there, they do.
Yeah, my limited point was that the fear factor is removed from them by saying that the leader is always available to them, and he has got an eye on what is happening in the process. Although the ownership is transferred, but the leader keeps an eye on that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest enemies to sustainable change is fear. You know, you just can't have it if people are afraid. I mean, people are afraid. That's on a personal level. If you have any kind of, you'll just be anything happen. You know, let me give you an example. You know, when we were doing Lonmin, we were down there for 6 years in South Africa, and we took one of the old mine managers' houses and converted it. And you know, we were consulting, so you know, everybody thinks when you're a consultant, you live in all these you know, fancy hotels. We stayed in this house. We had our own bedroom, so you know, and stuff like that. Houses on the rest of the house, and then the top floor was a classroom. So we were in there one night, and the road that we were on, the executive guest house, was like right up the street. I mean, like right up the street, like 3 doors down. And the CEO called me one night and he goes, "Do you mind if I come down?" You know, and you're kind of going, well, it's your company, you know, I mean, you can pretty much go wherever you want to go. So, you know, he said, okay, I'm going to walk down. So I wasn't going to tell anybody that he was coming down. And I walked out, and one guy actually had his feet up on one of the tables because we didn't have desks. We didn't want anybody to have a drawer to store paper in. So I said, you know, the CEO's coming down. And that was all it took. I mean, people were running out of the building, okay, because most of them had never even been face to face with the CEO before. You know, and I mean, half of them, he could have walked in and easily half of them wouldn't even have known who he was. Anyhow, so they all, you know, a bunch of them leave, but you know, there's always that little core group And about eight or nine people stayed. And the CEO sat down with them and he had a conversation with them that lasted about 4 hours. He's sitting on top of one of the tables. Everybody's just talking, very informal. They're asking anything that they want to ask. He's answering everything, that they want to ask. And I mean, even to the point where one of my guys that did a lot of Kaizen events for me, he jumped up off the table and he had a good relationship with the CEO. And he goes, "You're supposed to fire me." And the CEO looked down and he goes, "Why would I do that?" And he goes, "Every week," he goes, "I change something and people say that you're going to fire me." He goes, "So you're supposed to fire me." So the CEO takes a piece of paper and he writes a note and he hands it to Ulysses and he goes, "There you go." And what the note said, and I've got a scanned version, I haven't been able to find it, but I've got a scanned version of it. The note says, "If you're receiving this note, that means you've just fired Ulysses. I'm hiring back at twice his pay. Please stop firing him. This is getting expensive." And then he signed it. But just from that, two very, very simple things. I mean, by 6 o'clock the next morning, when people started arriving at work, everybody on that mine, there was 25,000 people on that mine. Everybody on that mine knew that the CEO had sat and talked to the people in continuous improvement for 4 hours. Okay.
Yeah,
and they knew that Ulysses was.
Sorry, Mike. I need you to again state what he has written on the paper, because I couldn't get that piece what he wrote on the paper. What did he write on the paper?
What he wrote on the paper was, it was a note. So when people told Ulysses, they would always tell him every week. Okay. And I mean, like, he did a Kaizen event at the hospital and he was slowing down people checking in because the phone was on the wall. Okay. And they'd go over and answer the phone. So when he's doing the Kaizen event, he just went over and pulled the phone out of the wall. Okay. So he's going, "There, now you don't have to do it." Right away, everybody'd go, "Well, the CEO is going to fire you." But what he said to the CEO was, he said, "You're supposed to fire me." And the CEO's like, "Why?" He goes, "Every week somebody tells me you're going to fire me." And so what the note said, and this was so Ulysses could give it to people that said that, it says, "You're receiving this note because you just fired Ulysses. Okay. I'm hiring him back at twice his pay." Okay. Which I tried billing at twice his pay. That didn't work, by the way. It's like, "I'm hiring back at twice his pay. Please stop firing him. This is getting expensive." And then he signed it. But it was two very simple things. It was him spending time for 4 hours and in one-on-one conversations with people, no formalities, nobody taking notes, nobody getting action items, everybody just talking. Okay. And that note was all it took. And all of a sudden there were no more change issues. Okay. Because there was no fear, there was nothing. They knew that these people had support. And our black belts had no fear, because the way we were structured, they reported in to a deployment manager who reported to an executive sponsor. But there was a rule in the company that said, you cannot fire a black belt unless the CEO tells you it's okay to fire them. Okay. And so now my black belts were fairly fearless. The organization realized that, the management expected them to take it seriously, and so you see people going, "Well, I didn't have top level support." That's all you needed for top level support, was something that simple.
That's what I like.
The CEO is not going to.
Yeah, that's what I like about what you said, that the leadership has to give in the vision, the mission statement, etc. However, these intervention at an appropriate time drives out the fear, and there's reinforcement available from the CEO. it's not necessary that he has to be around, but maybe at certain intervals, he comes in and gives a pep talk or, clears the air.
Yeah, I mean, and when he builds a relationship, when he knows who's leading these projects,
Mm,
and if he walks into an area,
mm,
like I had a guy named Franz de Beer that's working over in the smelter,
mm,
and when they see the CEO walking into the smelter area
mm,
and he sees Franz and he knows Franz and he walks over and he's like, well, how's your project going? And has a conversation with Franz, all of a sudden, people are going, okay, this is pretty much endorsed,
mm,
but now you see people that they think the CEO should come down every time they finish a project and go, all right, here's the change. You need to do this and you need to do this. That's not his job.
mm, mm,
Okay.
mm,
The job, he's doing his job. He's saying, okay, this is how we're going to do this. And your job is to support these people that are leading this change.
mm,
And I mean, as long as you do that, that's the support you should be getting.
mm,
You don't need somebody holding your hand. If that CEO needs to hold your hand,
mhm,
you're not doing your job.
mm,
I mean, you've got to accept responsibility for the implementation of the change yourself.
mm,
So, I mean, and that's why that ownership transfer is important. You got to understand that you're at 100%. You've got to go to 0, and that team's got to go to 100, and
mm,
that is your job. That's not the
mm,
CEO's job. That's
mm,
not anybody else's job, right? And you can argue about management and leadership and all the other stuff. It's got nothing to do with it. The person doing that project,
mm,
okay, whether they're an engineer or they're a shop floor worker or whatever position they have, the person leading that project, that ownership transfer belongs to them.
mm,
And if they're having trouble with it, go get a resource. I mean, that's fine.
mm,
I mean, you can go get like, somebody from HR and say, I need help figuring out how to do this or something like that. And that's fine. I mean, you can do that. But, it's your job, it's your responsibility, and you gotta take accountability for it.
mm.
So frequently they don't do that. They think somebody's supposed to show up riding on a white horse, save them, and then they ride off into the sunset. Yeah, it just
It's
doesn't work
as
that way.
as I understand what you're saying is that CEO's responsibility is more of a, after giving the vision and mission, is more of a human touch, a more that I know what you're doing. That sort of a reassurance to drive out the fear. I think that's the way that you're coming across to me. However, the ownership still remains with the people who are executing it.
Oh, absolutely. It's
Mm,
always their job. It's
mm,
always their ownership.
mm,
You just have to get them to understand it. And I mean, I mean, I've had one team uh, since 1995 that was just stubborn about it, and it wasn't my team. I mean, it was one of the black belts, that I was supporting. It was their team, and he's told me about the project, and so I went to a team meeting with him, and I could see exactly what he said. I mean, it didn't matter what he said. Somebody on the team would take the opposite and argue with him, and I mean, they were going nowhere. And so I waited till they were all done, and I said, okay, I tell you what, I said, we're just not going to have this team anymore. I said, we're just going to dissolve the team. And they're going, what? And I said, you guys don't want to do this? I said, I'm not going to force you to do it. I said, I don't have to work here. I don't care one way or the other if you do it. I said, I'll talk this over with the plant manager, explain to him that you guys don't want to do this. You think your job is to give this guy a hard time and not support him. And so we're just going to fold up the team, and you guys just won't have a team anymore. And they're like, oh, okay. And so everybody left, and by the next morning, the black belt goes, the team wants to meet again, and it's like, okay, and we walked into the room, and I said, if we're down here so you guys can give me more reasons of why this isn't going to work and you don't want to do it, I said, I'm not interested. I said, we're done. And they're going, no, no, no. We want to do this, but we need to know what we want to do. And so, I mean, evidently they'd gone off and had some talking, but I don't think they realized, how stubborn they were being. And you see that old thing called forming, storming, norming, that's the steps to team implementation. And they were just trapped in the storming stage, and it'd gone on long enough that they were very comfortable in the storming stage, and so, I mean, it just takes a little shock therapy to kind of get them out of there. But those are the calls you make. I mean, you get in the middle of it. I mean, it's people, it's always different cultures, not necessarily country cultures, because I really haven't found that big a difference, country culture wise. Well, I mean, you do go, obviously you see country cultures, but it doesn't affect what we do. But the company culture does. Okay. And, I mean, I grew up in Motorola, which was a very benign culture. My next job was, my first consulting job was with Allied Signal, which was a very pragmatic culture. And then, went to GE, which was, it's portrayed as being authoritarian, but it really wasn't authoritarian, but it was very much big on accountability and responsibility. So, I mean, we had 3 different cultures and they were all successful. But I could never have gone into Motorola and behaved the same way we behaved at General Electric, because it was counterculture. So, you have to be smart enough to pay attention to what people are doing around you, and you adapt to what they're doing, and you deal with them on their own terms, right? Because at the end of the day, you're not going to be successful without them, right?
That's right.
So yeah, it's a people business. This is all people.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop recording and see you later on a subject called transformation, and catch up with you then.
All right. That sounds like a good deal.
Take care, sir.
Take care.